best practices that I want each of you to really codify in your workflow rules. First, never deploy into production. We just mentioned that. It's very important. Always test. When you're deploying, always use your own company as an account condition to test the workflow rule. This should just be part of your process. You should not know any other way to do it. If you do that, you're much more likely to catch a bug in your workflow rule instead of all of your customers getting flooded with emails from Autotask. And this is also very important. No matter what happens, no matter how much you know for a fact the assumption is correct, you always include ticket status in your condition in a workflow rule. If you know for a fact the ticket will not be in a complete state, set it anyway. If you only want to work on completed tickets, set it anyway. You always use that one condition rule will save you time and time again. Use a naming standard for your business processes. I'm going to give you some examples of how we do it. You do not have to use our naming standard, but you need to have a naming standard. I'm going to show you why. We'll get into more details, but in that previous slide, you saw it gets difficult understanding how do different workflows interact with another. And that's because you didn't define the business process and you don't have a naming standard. The naming standard will save you time and time again because you can do more complex things with workflow rules when you use a naming standard than when you don't. And you'll see what I mean in a later example. And this is contrary to what a lot of people will say. Do not use plain English naming for your workflow rules. An example of a bad workflow rule name is notify customer of ticket close. That's a horrible name because you may have queues that have different notification templates for how they're notified a ticket is closed. There's no way to identify from that workflow rule name what that workflow rule is actually doing. Is that only for help desk? Is that for sales? Like, what is that workflow rule actually doing? And it's because you're using what you think are good naming practices, but you're not. And finally, and this is something a lot of people just don't realize, is your workflow rules should not solve everything. They should be layered and part of the larger business process. As we walk through our examples, what I'm going to actually do is start layering several workflow rules to where you see that they're stacked in a way that you've solved a lot of problems people ask about all the time on Reddit. They always ask these questions on Facebook. They're always asking the data forums. And so this is going to resolve that for you, but you can only do it by layering workflow rules. Each workflow rule should be looked at as an if-then statement. If this is true, then do this process. And so you layer your if-then statements just like you do in a program to implement the actual application itself, which is your business process. So let's quickly define a business process.